Basslines is sponsored by Hug Your Money. What would you do with more retirement income? Reliable increased income can be yours without unretiring. Ask your Hug financial coach about guaranteed income today. Hug Your Money. So unique, it's patented.
I'm Frances Rayam, and this is Basslines, a place where we make time to reminisce. We'll take you behind the scenes with celebrities like Frank Sinatra, Tony Bennett, Johnny Carson, and many, many more, through stories told firsthand by the man who worked with them. So cozy up, turn your cell phones off, you don't want to miss this. Please welcome into your hearts professional bassist, instructor, and conductor, Mr. Don Baldini.
Thank you, Frances, for that wonderful introduction.
Oh, it's not nearly enough.
You mentioned Carson. It's funny, when I picked up my phone this morning, I guess it was on Instagram, there was for some reason, they posted a Tonight Show when Sinatra was on, and Johnny was asking questions. As Johnny, he always seemed to be better than anybody else. But the reason I'm mentioning it is because I don't think a lot of people realize that Frank was fairly deep intellectually, and that people were surprised. Anyway, the question that Johnny asked Frank was, "Hey Frank, when you get in a romantic mood, whose records do you listen to?" And then Frank made a joke and said, "I listen to Jerry Fail instead of Jerry Vale." But he actually really said he listened to things like Daphnis to Chloe and various pieces of classical music. He mentioned opera, and the comments in the Instagram where people were surprised that he would, allude to listening to classical music, but he was a big fan of opera. He was a big fan of literature. He read a lot. He painted. He was actually a decent painter.
Yes.
So, there's often a side to these people that we often forget. But it made me think about when Frank was in Vegas, he would most often go to hear Vic Damone, who he admired a lot. Now, Vic had this incredible voice, but never had the ability to weave it into a song that would capture you the way Frank did.
Yeah, Frank was amazing for that.
I think Frank always wished he had Vic's voice.
Yep.
But Frank had this way of tailoring a song that made people feel that he was singing directly to them.
Yes, he did.
Which was part of the charm. But anyway, getting back to Vic Damone, and I started thinking about what we'd talk about today, and I was realizing I came across something in my jewelry box. It's a badge from the Italian American Police Association in Chicago, Illinois. I didn't work with Vic in Las Vegas. He had another bass player that kind of came with the Riviera Hotel. A guy named John Worcester was a friend of mine. But when Vic would go out of town, he would always call me. And so he called one day and said, "Come on, we're going to Chicago to play for my Uncle Frank." And so it was myself and Joey Preston was the drummer, and John Caleffi, the guitar player, who used to play on the Lucy Show.
Oh.
And then Joe Parnello, who was the conductor of Vic Damone, and eventually became Frank's conductor. That's how I got on Frank's gig, because of my association with Joe Parnello. Yeah. So anyway, we're on the plane, and when we get close to O'Hare, the stewardess comes out and talks to us and says, "Now you boys are going to be deplaning first because you're going to be met on the tarmac." And we said, "What are you talking about?" "Well, you're playing for the Italian American Police Association, and they're going to meet you. You're not going to go through the terminal. They're going to come and pick you up. You don't have to worry about your bags. We'll send them to the hotel and all that stuff." Okay, so anyway, so we land, and of course they put the stairs out, and sure enough, there's a limo sitting there with two detectives, and we deplane, and Vic was already there. This was just the musicians, just the four of us. And so we get in the limo, And these two guys turn around, they say, they introduce themselves. One of them was one of the guys on this card. I think his name was Frank Riccio. They were all Italians. And they said, "No, anything you boys want, just ask, and we mean anything." And
Can I see it?
And I'm going like, "What do you mean by anything?" And he said, "I mean anything." Well, of course, I wouldn't touch that. But so we go to the hotel, and I believe we're staying at the Hilton. Excuse me, not the Hilton. The Conrad Hilton. Yes, which was in Chicago. Big, famous hotel. So I'm up in the room, and I'm barely unpacked, and the phone rings, and it's Vic, and he says, "Get down to the lobby in 5 minutes. My Uncle Frank's taking us out to dinner."
Uncle Frank.
So we go downstairs, and again, it's detectives that are picking us up.
Sure.
And we go out to one of the suburbs, River Forest, and we go to this restaurant, and we go through the back door, through the kitchen, into this kind of room that was kind of like a banquet room.
Yeah.
And here's this guy sitting there with a black suit, a black tie, with about 3 guys on each side of him. And this is his Uncle Frank, whose name is Frank Bruno, which is an alias because his real name is Frank Buccetti, whose father was Machine Gun Frank Buccetti, who was the head of Murder Incorporated, which was Al Capone's hit squad. This is his Uncle Frank, his friend, the guy that's kind of hosting us for the weekend. Now, I don't know what connection he had with the Italian American Police Association, but they all seem to be interconnected.
I just love that there was an Italian American Police Association.
The man of the year for that year was Jimmy Durante, who's
really?
also Italian.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, the first thing, of course, he introduces himself, and he's the nicest guy. And we start, kibitzing and talking. And the next thing you know, we're at this restaurant, and they start bringing out all this fish. Now, I assume this is dinner.
Yeah.
Thank God Vic turns to one of us and says, "By the way, this is only the first course.
Pace yourself.
We're going to many more restaurants." And we said, "Oh, really?" So now this is a place that was famous for Lake Michigan, perch
Sure.
and whitefish and
fresh.
lake trout and things like that. So we go there and we have our fish, and then we get back in the cars and we go to another restaurant. The next restaurant was the Antipasto restaurant, with the salami and the mortadella.
It's a progressive party.
Yeah,
Right.
and the artichokes and the olives.
Oh.
And the whole time Uncle Frank is being Frank Buccetti,
Uncle Frank. Did he ask you to
a.k.a.
call him
Frank
Uncle
Bruno,
Frank?
is being really nice. He finds out that he asks me where I'm from. I say I'm from Racine, Wisconsin, which is about 50 miles north of Chicago. And he starts asking me about my dad, and my dad, of course, was still alive then. And he said, "Well, does he want to come to the concert tomorrow night?" And I said, "I don't know. I could call him." And he said, "Call him up. I'll send a car up for him." So I called my dad, and he said, "Sure, I'd love to come." So sure, I mentioned to Frank, Uncle Frank, and he said, "I'll take care of it." So he did. The next night, my dad showed up and came to the concert with his current wife, my stepmother. Anyway, so now we go to the third restaurant for the pasta. And I remember at the time, Joe and I went into the men's room, and we're in the men's room. I said, "Man, they're trying to kill us with food. I mean, this is like getting absurd. Because the whole thing is, when you go, they're going to bring food put it on the table. You got to eat it.
Sure.
You don't want to leave an empty plate.
You don't want to insult Uncle Frank for sure, right?
And then after the pasta place, we took a rest, and we had a few drinks. We had some wine. Then we went to another place we had veal, we had chicken, we had beef.
Come
we had
on.
just
After all those-
unbelievable. So anyway, the Italian American Police Association, we give this. We have no rehearsal. We're basically just going to play with Vic, so we know our stuff. But as it turns out, it was at the Hilton Hotel in the big ballroom, the Conrad Hilton, which I think was as I remember, was like the flagship for the Hilton chain. Huge hotel in Chicago. And we went and we did the gig. Vic, of course, was very well received. And then Jimmy Durante came out and did his shtick. And then, you know, afterwards, we also got together for another big meal. We didn't go to different places. This was all at the Hilton. And they gave us all this badge as a kind of a memory of the occasion. So I just thought...
I peeked in that pocket. So, but please finish your thought, yeah.
Well, I was going to say, and they gave us, you know, my name was Baldwin in those days because
that's what I wanted to
when
ask.
my father came to America, his name was Giovanni Salvatore Baldini, but he had forged papers because he was underage. So when he became a resident of America, he was always nervous that he was going to get deported because he was underage.
How old was he?
He was 15.
Wow.
Yeah, he was underage to come through Ellis Island.
Gutsy.
And so
Gutsy.
he changed it to Baldwin.
Yep.
So that was my christened name. I changed it back.
I remember one time we were rehearsing or something, and I noticed one of your cases said Baldwin.
Yes.
And I asked you, I said, did you change it to Baldwin because somebody on the road didn't want an Italian name? Because there was such a, there was such prejudice against Irish people, Italian people, whatever. Dan,
well, in fact, it worked just the opposite with me because people like Sinatra, although he knew me as Baldini,
hey, paisan,
because thank God Joe Parnello introduced me as Baldini, even though my name officially was Baldwin, and my checks said Baldwin, but Frank never
Parnello
knew me.
Yeah.
But people like Frank would say, what do you think, are you ashamed of your heritage?
Right.
Why did you change it? Well, I would have never changed my name, but my father did it because he was afraid of getting deported. So,
for people who don't know Vic Damone, for younger people who might be watching this and don't know anything about Vic Damone, what would you tell them to look for?
Well, first of all, he was gorgeous. He was a really, really good-looking man. In fact, I remember he was married to Pier Angeli, who was a young, beautiful Italian star. But Vic's last marriage was to Diane Carroll, who was also very beautiful. And I remember seeing the two of them at the Golden Nugget in Las Vegas because he came to see Frank, and the two of them were like just stunning. But Vic was really good looking, and he was somewhat of a movie star besides being a singer. He had this unbelievable voice. He had this gift of this gorgeous voice, but he never had quite the savvy that say Frank did or Tony Bennett did for shaping a song. But
when somebody can really deliver a song like that and hold the audience in the palm of their hand, it's a magic moment, and it's a gift that no matter how much you want to teach that to someone, it seems elusive. You either have it or you don't.
You're right. Well, as a follow-up to this dinner, now, Vic was a sweet guy. How do I say this politely? As Robin Williams would have said, he was a couple tacos short of a combination plate. Vic was simple.
Yeah?
And he would do questionable things. For example, as we're eating with Uncle Frank, Vic is saying, yeah, you got to come and visit me in Vegas because I'm there 4 times a year, and I've got this boat. I keep it on Lake Mead, and we can go fishing. So Uncle Frank does come to visit Vic a couple of months later, and the minute he steps off the plane, the gaming commission tells him that he has to turn around because basically he's a known wise guy from Chicago, and Vic got into all kinds of trouble for even inviting him to Las Vegas to be his guest. So, he never thought of that, but there you go. Another funny story about Vic. Just to follow up, Vic had an incredible voice. Joe Parnello did all his arrangements. They were wonderful. He was a great lounge act. He never was a main room act for some reason in Vegas. He always worked the lounge at the Riviera. I don't understand why.
It's funny, his name is so well known.
It is.
Especially in any sort of Italian family that grew up listening to that kind of music. I should ask you what years that was.
One of his big songs was, I have often walked on the street before.
Yes.
And he had this beautiful tenor voice that was just unbelievable.
Basslines is sponsored by Hug Your Money. Feel like you're spinning your wheels? Get a fresh start and professional guidance. Schedule your free consultation with a Hug financial coach today. Hug Your Money. So unique, it's patented.
Yeah.
Another quick Vic story. When I first worked with Sinatra, I was with Harry James.
Yes.
I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but the entertainment director at Caesar's Palace. Frank had been banned from Nevada. He had an incident at the Sands.
A little incident.
And
he had a little incident.
He pulled a gun on
involving a
somebody.
weapon.
He and Dean Martin were upset over the fact that
Yeah.
the blackjack dealer was using a shoe. There were 4 or 5 decks
Yep.
instead of using one deck.
They
Anyway,
didn't like that.
yeah, so he lost. Frank was part owner of the Calneva Lodge up in Lake Tahoe. He lost his gambling license, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know.
Even if you're Frank Sinatra, you don't get to do that.
No.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the entertainment director at Caesar's Palace was able to convince the gaming board that, Sinatra would be a good thing for business. And so anyway, he worked out a deal at Caesar's Palace. And he thought it would be fun and interesting to put Frank with his original band, Harry James. So Frank was in Los Angeles. Well, he lived in Palm Springs, but we rehearsed in Los Angeles. Frank was part owner of a record label called Reprise. And it was his office and his Reprise studios were on the Warner Brothers lot. I don't know what the connection was with Warner Brothers. But anyway, we went there to rehearse with Frank. The Harry James Band went to Los Angeles. We stayed at a hotel in Hollywood, and we rehearsed with Frank every day at the soundstage at Warner Brothers. The night we were coming home, a couple of the guys, my friend Marty Harrell and both trombone players, and Jim Hunsinger, they both were also playing with Vic, because Vic was a lounge act. You could do Harry's set and do the lounge act. They dovetailed against each other.
Yep.
So we were driving back from Los Angeles, and one of us had to go to the bathroom, and we stopped the car out in the desert. And as we were relieving ourselves, there was this light on the horizon that looked like just a white, bright light, like you would see on an airplane, but it wasn't moving. And while we were outside the car, and by the way, there was no traffic at all. This was, I don't know, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. I remember we were trying to get back so these guys could do the show with Vic at 10 o'clock at the Riviera. So it was somewhere in between.
Yeah.
And this light suddenly moved and came right above us. Now, it was really high, but we both well, the 3 of us, we all went like, oh my God, what is this? So we didn't want to believe it was a flying saucer or anything like that.
Did you hear any sound?
No sound.
No sound.
But the reason I'm telling you this is when Hunsinger and Marty got back to the Riviera, they mentioned to Vic that we had seen this strange occurrence. Well, either Vic had knowledge or, anyway, he was good friends with a colonel from Nellis Air Force Base, which was a big Air Force base outside Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Now, maybe Vic had talked to this guy and had some previous knowledge, but when the set was over, Marty and Jim get off the bandstand, and here's these Air Force guys waiting to talk to them. Because Vic had called his friend and said, hey, my guys saw, and now maybe Vic knew that this had been a common occurrence, in the days or the weeks leading up to our encounter.
Right.
But this colonel said to Jim and Marty, we've been tracking this thing for a long time. We've sent up fighter jets to try to confront this light, and they've never been able to even get close. When they get close, it just goes away. And I don't want to say what it is, but it's definitely a UFO. So, Goody Two-Shoes Vic had to call the Air Force colonel, so that was kind of an interesting, yeah.
Well, boy, I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah, I don't either.
What could you possibly
I mean,
say
I never
about that?
really believed in that stuff.
You just don't know. What you know is that you saw something that didn't seem
Well, we know
normal to you
now
without
that,
sound,
that
right?
there's countless hundreds of thousands of pages of documentation that the Air Force has had.
Well, I mean, a
with these-
UFO is just unidentified flying object, right?
Yeah.
We don't know if little green men get out of
No,
them,
we
or it's
don't
just
know
something we
that.
don't know, but it's not identified.
No,
Yeah.
we don't know that.
No,
we
and
don't that. I don't know if he was trying to score points with his friend or whatever, but that was typical of the kind of thing he would do,
That's funny.
He was always kind of the vigilante kind of type person, that if something was going on that was illegal or out of the question.
When was this? What years do you think this was? Can you place this for me somewhere in your timeline?
This would have been probably the late 60s,
Okay, And
somewhere in that ballpark, yeah.
yeah, I don't want to drag you off topic, but you mentioned Diane Carroll,
Yes.
fabulous vocalist. Do you have
Fabulous.
stories about Diane Carroll?
Well, the only story I have about her is that I was a big fan. A lot of people don't realize they knew her. There was a show called Julia,
Yes.
where she played a woman doctor, and I think it was the first African American that got a starring role in a sitcom
Yep.
ever.
It's very popular. I think
It
you're
was very
right.
popular,
Yep.
and people don't realize what a good singer. I knew she was a singer because the Modern Jazz Quartet had done an album about the Commedia dell'arte in Europe, and there was I think it was called Columbina, and she sang this ditty that John Lewis wrote, the suite.
Yeah.
And it was Diane Carroll, and that was the first time I had ever heard her. But it's interesting because when Johnny Carson retired, and the weeks leading up to his retirement, he did a lot of reminiscing about things that had been on the show.
Yes.
And of course, one of the things was he talked about all the people that had done New York, New York on the show. And, obviously Sinatra was identified with that song.
Sure.
But tons of other people had done that song. Liza Minnelli, for one,
Had
and
great
Diane
voice.
Carroll. As it turns out, they put like a sort of a retrospective of all the people. I don't know how they did it, because believe it or not, a lot of them were in similar keys.
I was just going to ask
But
that.
as it turns out, Diane Carroll was the knockout.
Yeah.
She did a better job than Frank
Really?
on that song. Yeah.
What was
yeah.
it you liked about it?
She just, I don't know. It was just, that's a great question. She just gave it an energy, a lightness. Frank's was bop, bop, bop.
Right.
I don't know. I never saw it's from a show, a movie that was done basically called New York, New York.
Yeah, right.
Starring Robert De Niro
Yep.
playing a tenor saxophone player. And Liza, of course, was in it.
Right.
I never saw the original movie. I never saw how the song was treated. But Don Costa, a good friend of mine, wrote that classic arrangement for Frank.
Oh, right.
And that's become
Of course.
synonymous now and identified with New York.
Yeah,
They
it's like
play it at
name that
Yankee
tune.
games.
Yeah.
They play it. I think they even probably play it at some point when they dropped the ball on New Year's Eve. I mean, that's become, that introduction is as iconic as the da ba da da da.
Yes.
The singing in the rain
Of course,
introduction.
Yeah. No, it's like name that tune. As soon as you
Yes.
hear the first couple of notes,
Yeah.
you know it.
Yeah,
There's no
yeah.
way you're going to miss that. Same thing
Yeah.
with Mac the Knife.
Mac the Knife.
Mac the Knife.
Yeah.
So, well, do we have time for you to tell a story about Mac the Knife? Am I dragging you in other areas again? Or
No,
not?
but since the bass is here, Frank had done a recording with Quincy Jones, and the name of the album was L.A. is My Lady. And Quincy had written this song. They were trying to get a song to identify with Los Angeles. It never caught on, like no L.A. song. I mean, the only L.A. song is Hooray for Hollywood.
Yeah.
To me,
Yeah.
that's... But anyway, L.A. is My Lady. He recorded it with Quincy, and on that album, they did Mac the Knife. And Ray Brown, a famous bass player,
Ray Brown.
who was with Oscar Peterson, and
Yep.
we all idolized.
Yeah. Exactly.
He had done a little introduction. Now, I never heard the album, but Frank decided he wanted to do it in the show. So he rarely talked to the musicians, but he says to me, I want to do a bass introduction. And I said, so the song's in the key of G, right? He said, yeah, and make it simple, because I always have trouble finding my pitch. So this is what happened.
Can't go far.
I
It's
can't.
okay.
I think
Go
I'm
ahead.
okay.
You can do it.
I thought to myself, okay,
Help you.
well, it's in the key of G. Let's see, what can I do? And I thought to myself, well, in music, there's a chord called a dominant seventh chord. That's, which leads you to, okay, so I thought, all right, I'll stake around the dominant seventh chord. So I started fooling around, and like Frank's right there, we're at a rehearsal. We're in New York at Carnegie Hall. There's a 90-piece orchestra, and he's like kind of putting me on the spot, and I go like, well, oh, the shark has, and that was it.
You got it.
And he loved it. He said, oh my God, that's so great, blah, 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 blah. So that was it. I mean, I spent, zero seconds thinking about it. But as it turns out, it worked out really well. And I don't know what was on the original recording, but me doing that little lick wound up being on a recording we did live at the Meadowlands.
Yes.
And so, when I'm driving in the car, listening to Sirius Radio, once in a while I'll hear my little lick. Now, when I left Frank, the couple people that followed me didn't do it quite the same, and it didn't. I didn't think it worked so well, but and I don't know if he eventually took it out of the show or whatever. But
it's on the Meadowlands album.
But it's on the Meadowlands album,
You bet.
that little introduction. There's nothing to it, but it worked, and it set him up. And he was able to find his bit. And you as a singer, you know what that's like.
Yes,
Sometimes
you can't hear it. Yep.
Sometimes musicians tend to forget that they're accompanists when they're working with singers. They're not there to be the star.
Well, we love them. So
and
I have so many questions for you, but we're out of time again.
We are.
So will you come back and do another show?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you for watching Basslines, and remember, you don't have to thank us or laugh at our jokes. Sit deep and come often. You're one of the folks. We're looking forward to our next visit here with you, right here on Basslines.
Basslines is sponsored by Hug Your Money. Tired of juggling your finances? Your Hug financial coach can help. Hug Your Money. So unique, it's patented.